The Chicago Blackhawks have now dropped all 4 preseason games. Is it time to be concerned?
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2. Be sure, though, to go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account. That's at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And got to let you all know as well that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. If you haven't done so already, go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and then use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. 4th preseason game of action for the Blackhawks last night in Minnesota against the Wild, and unfortunately, it led to the 4th loss of the preseason for the Blackhawks. I'll be talking about what the concern level should be, as they are still winless at this point in the preseason, as well as what went wrong in Minnesota last night. But before I do that, I did want to be sure to go over all of the latest training camp roster cuts that we've seen over the past couple of days, because there have been several rounds of them. Most of them at this point are to be expected, but there are a couple of players in particular, a couple of players that I've had circled and have talked about throughout training camp and have been parts of storylines that I've told all of you Blackhawks fans to keep an eye on. So I want to be sure to go over those players in particular who have been involved in these roster cuts. The first round that I want to talk about came after the Blackhawks' disappointing 2-0 loss to the Red Wings last Friday night, which, you know, they had a ton of prospects in the lineup, but I would have liked to see a better offensive performance, especially from Lukas Reichel, Frank Nazar, and Nick Lardis on that top line. But part of this, all the players that were part of this first round of roster cuts aren't surprising, as they're all expected to begin the year with the Rockford IceHogs. DJ King, Austin Strand on the back end, Ben Gaudreau in net, who had a nice performance in his win at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. Also got a little bit of action in the preseason. We'll see kind of how he mixes or where exactly he fits in down with the IceHogs or potentially with the Indy Fuel in the ECHL. And then we saw Gavin Hayes and Paul Ludwinski, two guys who are part of their who are both in their first full-time year at the professional scene, along with Jalen Lipin and Marcel, two guys who were both with Rockford last year, were also part of this roster cut. And then Nick Lardis was sent back to the Brantford Bulldogs as well. I was hoping to see Lardis get maybe one more preseason game of action, but ultimately he was going to end up back in Brantford one way or another, but hopefully it's going to be a massive 4th and final campaign for him there with the Bulldogs. And then after the Blackhawks blew a 2-0 lead on Saturday in St. Louis and wind up losing this one 3-2 in overtime, another slew of roster cuts came. This one certainly more notable than the first. Colton Dach, Cole Gutman, Ryder Rolston, Samuel Savoy, Landon Slaggert, and Ethan Del Mastro were all assigned to Rockford as well. For Dach, he was someone who was outspoken about trying to earn a job in training camp. I'm sure he's disappointed to not make the team. Same with Cole Gutman, who's kind of been in that weird tweener stage these last couple of years. Rolston, that was to be expected. Savoy, that was to be expected. Same with Landon Slaggert. Ethan Del Mastro, someone who I thought had a sneaky chance to maybe earn a spot on the Blackhawks opening night roster. Ultimately not surprised, though, to see him going back to Rockford. Would have liked to see him have a little bit more of a notable training camp in preseason, though, and with him being ultimately assigned to Rockford here before Nolan Allen, that tells me the Blackhawks think Allen is much closer to the NHL level than Ethan Del Mastro is, which is a little bit surprising to me. And then on Monday morning, we saw Brett Seney, Mitchell Weeks, and Zach Sanford get assigned to Rockford as well. Seney and Sanford had to clear waivers to go down to the AHL, but both of them did ultimately clear. So all of those players going to open up the year with the Rockford Ice Hogs. None of them really that surprising. Nick Lardis, as I mentioned, going back to the Brantford Bulldogs. And that leads us into last night's game against the Minnesota Wild, where because of all of these training camp cuts, the Blackhawks were really left with the NHL regulars for the most part. We saw Jason Dickinson and Nick Foligno for the first time in the preseason. Connor Bedard played. Tyler Bertuzzi was out there with him as well. Philip Kurashev got a look on the top line for the first time here in the preseason. Taylor Hall was in the lineup. Andreas Athanasiou, Lucas Reichel, right? The only notables for the Blackhawks who didn't play last night were Teuvo Teravainen up front, Alec Martinez and TJ Brody on the back end, and then Peter Mrazek in net. Drew Commesso got his first start of the preseason, wound up playing the entire 60-minute game. But yeah, a pretty dreadful performance from the Blackhawks. Didn't start out that way. They opened the scoring. The certified goal scorer, Jason Dickinson, scored his first goal of the preseason, jumped on a rebound from Seth Jones. The Wild did go on to answer to even things up 1-1 going into the first intermission. And then in the second period, I mean, it was like the Blackhawks couldn't do anything right. They wind up giving up 5 goals. They take 3 penalties in the period that lead to 2 power play goals. They get outshot 17-8, and it was like the snowball just kept rolling in the wrong direction. What really kickstarted it, though, was a couple of terrible turnovers from Kevin Korchinski, and that was not what he needed, because with Wyatt Kaiser being out right now due to a little bit of a health scare, which fortunately seems like everything's going to be okay for him, and he does seem like he's going to come back sometime sooner rather than later, but because of that, Korchinski had a real opportunity to potentially earn a job on the opening night roster, but first goal of the game for Minnesota was because of a bad decision and a poor turnover by Korchinski, and that's what happened on the second goal as well. Unfortunately, he actually made the right decision on the second turnover. It's like he did learn from his mistake, but he just flubbed it. He tried to go off the glass to get the puck out of the defensive zone. He flubs it. Hartman takes it, wraps it around the Wild net, and then, you know, I got to say, Connor Murphy didn't do his defensive partner much help. I mean, kind of just stood in no man's land in front of his goaltender, didn't pick up Lauko, who was streaking down the slot. Hartman finds him, bang, just like that. It's 2-1 Wild, and then the Blackhawks could never get any win back in their sails. 5 unanswered for the Wild there before Connor Bedard scored his first goal of the preseason, a buzzer beater just before the second intermission. The Wild go on to tack 2 more, 7-2 final. Blackhawks give up a touchdown. That moves their preseason record to 0-3-1. As far as what the concern level should be, I know it's the preseason. I know these games don't matter, and we've really only seen the NHL regulars in 2 of the 4 games. But still, Blackhawks have yet to win. They blew a 2-1 lead in the opener. They blew a 2-0 lead in St. Louis on Saturday. And then they get spanked and give up a touchdown to Minnesota, a team they've really struggled against for years and years and years. The reason this is concerning is because of everything I've talked about in training camp, how the Blackhawks need to take that next step. And every move they made in the offseason, all the veteran additions, was to take that next step, to not be one of the worst teams in hockey, to not be a bottom feeder, to go and be more competitive. And this looked like a bottom 5 team in hockey last night. And I know it's just a preseason game, but certainly concerning considering the amount of NHL regulars that were in there for Chicago and the amount of NHL regulars that were in there for the Wild. That was just a performance that cannot happen, and cannot imagine Luke Richardson was very happy with his group. But at the same point in time, with this being a meaningful season for the Blackhawks, the most meaningful season they've had really since I've been covering this team, not only is there expectations for the players, and was it disappointing to see them have that performance last night, eyes are going to go on Luke Richardson. This is the first year where he really has some expectations. Same even with Kyle Davidson up in the front office, with expectations, with the desire and the ability, because of the moves they made, to take that next step. If they don't, there's going to be a lot of pressure on some of these guys. It's not just the players. So the concern level, it's not, time to hit the panic button or anything. It's not through the roof, but definitely some cause for concern with the Blackhawks being winless. And to me, that just makes these final 2 preseason games. They'll play the Wild again, looking for revenge on Friday at the United Center before the preseason finale on Saturday against the Blues. Blackhawks got to at least win one of those. Would be lovely to come away with both on home ice. Get this team a little bit of momentum and mojo going before the season opener on October 8th in Utah, which again, just as a reminder, Blackhawks fans, we're less than 1 week away, and I have a ton of great content planned. Still got a slew of Blackhawks season previews to go over. Taylor Hall, Lucas Reichel, Alex Vlasic, Alec Martinez, Tyler Bertuzzi. I also got a Blackhawks bold predictions episode dropping before the start of the regular season. So make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the great Blackhawks content that I have planned before they kick things off in Utah. One final little tidbit before I get into segment 2. Just before I jumped on here to record, the Blackhawks announced that Frank Nazar, Kevin Korchinski, and Louis Crevier have been assigned to the Rockford IceHogs, while AJ Spellacy is going back to Windsor. For Spellacy, we knew he was ultimately going to end up back in the OHL, but got to give him a shout out for the way he impressed throughout the preseason and at the rookie showcase. And I love to see the Blackhawks kind of give him a reward. I mean, got tons of opportunities, even played in the game last night in Minnesota. And as he did throughout the preseason, he didn't look out of place. So very excited for him to hopefully carry that momentum over to the Windsor Spitfires this year. Crevier, we expected him to begin things with the IceHogs. For Korchinski and Nazar, kind of the same. They were both guys who had an outside chance, I would say, to make the Blackhawks opening night roster. Nazar probably was more of a long shot than Korchinski. And it was pretty clear with Nazar not having standout performances in his preseason games that he wasn't going to make this team, which, isn't the end of the world. That was, again, the most likely path for him. And, he's going to get a heck of an opportunity down there in Rockford. I'm sure he's going to be playing in all situations. And I really hope he keeps his head up because he shouldn't be disappointed by this result. I know he'll be a little bit upset, but it's not going to take much. And I'm sure we'll be seeing him at the NHL level sooner rather than later. I mean, one injury and Frank Nazar's up in the NHL. So hopefully he takes this in stride and uses it as a learning opportunity down in Rockford. And same with Kevin Korchinski. I mean, based on what we saw last night, with Wyatt Kaiser being out, he had an opportunity to prove himself as part of this roster, and he just didn't take advantage of the opportunity. And it's very clear he still needs some seasoning. He still needs some physical maturity. And he's going to get, like Nazar, a ton of opportunities in Rockford. Heck, he could even be paired with Artem Levshinov down there, which could be a potential pairing of the future in Chicago. So we've seen Alex Vlasic, after some time down in Rockford, look like a different guy up at the NHL level. Ethan Del Mastro, I was really, really impressed with his kind of development in Rockford last year. I think the same thing can definitely happen to Kevin Korchinski. So I hope neither he nor Nazar are too discouraged by this decision from the Blackhawks. But there is the latest on the training camp roster for Chicago as they're down to their final 2 preseason games, which become that much more significant and that much more crucial considering they're 0-3-1 through their first 4 here in the preseason. Going to take my first break, Blackhawks fans, but don't go anywhere because when I return, I'm going to get into Teuvo Teravainen's 24-25 season preview. But first, I do got to let you all know about the fine folks over at FanDuel. And to all my NFL fans out there, you can now start the season with a big return over at FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can go and check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. And to all of my Blackhawks fans out there, FanDuel has dropped the over-under lines for not only the Blackhawks, but each of the other 31 NHL teams for the 2024-2025 regular season. And the Blackhawks are currently listed at 74.5, which I think is a really savvy number, unfortunately, from the sportsbooks. I've said time and time again on the show the last couple of weeks, 70 to 78 points, that's where I ultimately end up seeing the Blackhawks. But if you've got an inkling on the over or the under, make sure to go and bet with FanDuel. Go and check out FanDuel.com right now. And if you're not already signed up, go and create an account. And when you put $5 down, you'll get a free $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. All you got to do to get $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed, if you're not already signed up, go and visit FanDuel.com, create an account, and put $5 down. You'll get $200 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Football season underway, college football, hockey season right around the corner. No better time than to get in with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. All right, back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you all for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen of the day. Now for your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. And you can go and find the link to Locked On NHL down in the description, or simply search on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2. Next up on my Blackhawks season previews is none other than 30-year-old forward Teuvo Teravainen. 30 years old is this guy. Where has the time gone, Blackhawks fans? Makes me feel quite old about myself. But for Teravainen, of course, we all know he was a first-round pick, 18th overall for the Blackhawks, way back in the 2012 NHL draft. Really burst onto the scene, though, in Chicago during that 2014-15 season. Played in 32 regular season games that year, but boy, did he come up big for the Blackhawks in the Stanley Cup playoffs, in particular, the Stanley Cup final, Game 1, Game 2. Teuvo was absolutely magical, on a line with Antoine Vermette. Good times and simpler times, Blackhawks fans. Wound up sticking around for one more year here in Chicago, but did ultimately get traded. Was part of that salary cap dump to the Carolina Hurricanes along with Brian Bickell's contract. And Teuvo ended up spending the next 8 years with the Carolina Hurricanes in a pretty successful 8-year stint for him. Career best season happened in 2016, I want to say. When was it? I have it here somewhere. It was 2018-19, excuse me, when he put up 76 points in 82 games. He also tallied 60 points 3 other times. So in 4 of the 8 years that he was there, he registered at least 60 points. However, in his final couple of years with the Hurricanes, the productivity did take a little bit of a dip. And that's why for those of you who are listening to my episodes throughout the summer and throughout free agency, when I was kind of going through my ideal options, a lot of people were calling for this Teuvo Teravainen reunion, and I wasn't against it, but he just wasn't one of my favorite options, considering what I had seen from him in the last couple of years. And now he is 30 years old, and there is some concern about players when they hit the other side of 30. Looking back at the 2022-2023 season, really concerning year for Teuvo. 68 games played, only had 12 goals, 25 assists for 37 points, and out of those 12 goals, only 5 of them came from the even strength variety. So not very productive whatsoever at 5v5. I will say, though, he did bounce back nicely last year. In 76 games, he potted 25 goals, which was a career high, added 28 assists for 53 points. The assist level, the playmaking probably has taken a little bit of a dip, in my opinion, but nice to see him at least respond well in the goal scoring category. However, he shot a career best 17.6%, which was over 5% higher than his previous career best. So because of the dip in the playmaking and the assist numbers, because of kind of the outlier goal scoring year he had last year, and considering looking at the ice time he had in Carolina, he had averaged only over 17 minutes once in his last 4 years with the Hurricanes. He's a solid defensive player, someone who can help out on, the penalty kill as well as the power play. Maybe on a Stanley Cup contender, he's more of a second power play type of guy, but the Blackhawks still will gladly use his help on the top power play unit. But those were kind of the reasons why Teuvo Teravainen wasn't one of my favorite free agents to go after for the Blackhawks this summer to add to their forward group. But undoubtedly, with that being said, Teuvo is a much better option than what the Blackhawks have had these last couple of years. And as far as my expectations for Teuvo Teravainen in his first year back with the Blackhawks. Number one is to immediately add offensive help to this top six. Even if it is, kind of been a little bit of a dip for him these last couple of years in overall playmaking, he's going to get a much greater opportunity here with the Blackhawks. Heck, he might even get an opportunity with Connor Bedard on the top line. We don't know for sure exactly what the top six combinations are going to look like, but Teuvo Teravainen is going to have his fingerprints all over the top six. He's going to be playing on the power play. He needs to bring offensive help, even if it is only in the form of 50 points this year. It's going to be much better help than what the Blackhawks have had these last couple of years. So he definitely needs to provide offensive help in the top six. That's expectation number one. Number two for me, like I already said, is to help out the special teams department. Special teams for the Blackhawks has been a killer these last couple of years, and it's not surprising that a lot of bad teams in the league are plagued by bad special teams. It's one of the small things that the Blackhawks need to take care of in order to take that next step, and fortunately, Teuvo Teravainen can help out in both of those areas. A really good defensive forward, someone who's been playing on the penalty kill since he was with Chicago when he first burst into the league. And even though I do think he's more of a power play 2 type of guy on a good team, it's a better option for Connor Bedard at the other circle than he's had the last couple of years, more capable. So Teuvo definitely needs to help out in both of those areas and just be a responsible player all over the ice, right? He's one of the more experienced players on this team. I know he's not like an outspoken veteran leader, but he's got to play like a leader out there, be responsible, be engaged, you can't take nights off. We can't afford to have Teuvo Teravainen taking nights off. So those are my expectations for him this year. As far as what areas I think I'd like to see him improve upon this year, it's kind of hard to say when I haven't watched every single Carolina Hurricanes game over these past 8 years since he's been there. However, as I've already alluded to, the playmaking, we've seen that take a dip these last couple of years. I want to see him, take a little bit of strides in those areas because he's going to get much more of an opportunity. I know he might not be the most capable in those areas now that he is 30 years old, but again, it's better than what Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks have had in the top six for these last few years. So just make sure to execute with the skill set that he has and to play with speed. It's what Luke Richardson, it's what Kyle Davidson wants from this team more and more and more as they hopefully start to get competitive. And Teuvo Teravainen, even though he isn't like a world breaker with his wheels, he is someone who's capable of playing with some speed out there. So play fast, play smart, execute. Those are kind of the areas that I want to see Teuvo Teravainen take advantage of this year. As far as the numbers go, what numbers do I expect out of Teuvo Teravainen? Again, we don't know exactly if he's going to be Connor Bedard's right-hand man or not. We don't know if he's going to be on the second line, but I imagine he's going to see at least some games with Connor Bedard throughout the course of the year. I imagine he's going to be on the top power play unit more times than not throughout these 82 games. So on an 82 game pace, as far as goals go, I gave Teuvo Teravainen 25. I don't know if he's going to break his career high that he had last year. And it's been a while since we've seen him play in an 82 game season. Of course, I'd love to see him be healthy and play in all 82, but I don't know if that's going to happen with his age. However, if we do put this on an 82 game pace, I believe Teuvo Teravainen is going to get a lot of opportunities, and I do expect him to break the 20 goal margin again on an 82 game pace. If he doesn't, I'd be very disappointed. So I have him penciled in at 25 along with 27 assists. I do think he's going to get a lot of opportunities, but even though the Blackhawks top six will be better, I still think they're going to be a little bit offensively challenged. So considering the lack of playmaking that Teravainen's had on the Hurricanes these last couple of years, which those offenses I expect to be better than the Blackhawks offense this year, it's just hard for me to say or expect anything above 30 assists for Teuvo Teravainen. So I have him at 25 goals, 27 assists, 52 points at an 82 game pace. I also have him penciled in for 6 power play goals, which I really think is doable considering he has Connor Bedard, the weapons that the Blackhawks have, and that Teuvo Teravainen's potted at least 5 power play goals in each of the last 3 seasons. 2 of the last 3 years, he scored 9 power play goals. And then as far as the time on ice goes, even though I mentioned he's only hit the 17-minute marker once in the last 3 years, I expect him to have over 18 minutes per game this year in the Blackhawks top six because of the way he's going to play on special teams. And because of those minutes, he's got to execute. And if he doesn't come with a strong performance in his first year back with the Blackhawks, jeopardizes the Hawks not taking that next step. Again, signifying everyone on this roster has to put their best foot forward. Every spot matters for the Blackhawks this year. That's what makes it exciting, but that's also what makes it concerning that they haven't won a preseason game thus far. But there is Teuvo Teravainen's 2024-25 season preview coming up in just a moment. Before I wrap up today's episode, I do still have to get into our weekly Mailbag fan segment, but this time it's happening on Wednesday. Real quick, though, I do got to talk to you all about game time. Hockey season is right around the corner, and I cannot wait to get back to the United Center here in Chelsea Dagger, grabbing a cold beverage and enjoying the atmosphere at the Madhouse. And I'm sure many of you Blackhawks fans watching and listening to this feel the exact same way that I do, and that's why I'm here to tell you all about Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events, not just hockey, even easier. And I personally have used Game Time for close to the last 10 years now. It's always been the cheapest and fastest way for me to purchase all of my tickets, whether I'm going to see the Blackhawks at the United Center, Cubs down at Wrigley Field, or even if I'm traveling in another city and want to go and see a comedy event or go and want to see a concert with one of my buddies. Plus, I love how Game Time provides pictures from every seat in the stadium, so you know exactly what to expect before you arrive and before you make your purchase. Plus, last-minute tickets, flash deals, and zone deals make it so easy to find and buy tickets now that hockey season is about to take over. I highly recommend you all go and download the Game Time app right now, and when you do, create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. Yes, you heard me right. $20 off to come see Connor Bedard down at the United Center this year. All you got to do, download Game Time, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. Real quick, just a reminder to be on the lookout for the rest of my Blackhawks season previews here before the regular season opener in Utah on October 8th. Still have to go over Tyler Bertuzzi, Taylor Hall, Alex Vlasic, Alec Martinez, TJ Brody. Lots of good ones coming up. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube so you don't miss out on any of the great Blackhawks content that I have planned before the start of the regular season. Segment 3. Before I close out today's episode, do still have to get into our Mailbag fan segment. Apologies for it coming out on Wednesday this week, but with the Central Division Roundtable episode dropping on Monday, I didn't want to flood that episode and make sure it didn't get as many viewers. So moving Mailbag Monday to Wednesday this week. And again, if you have a Blackhawks related question as you're listening or watching this right now, be sure to drop it down in the comment section. You can also hit me up on any one of my social media channels or even email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. First question comes from PHHDVM on YouTube, who asks, how do you feel about Ovechkin potentially passing Gretzky? Do you think he does it this season? There's a part of me that hates to see the record change hands. So for those who aren't aware, Alexander Ovechkin needs 41 goals to tie and 42 goals to break Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal-scoring record. And for Ovechkin last year, got off to a really slow start, but did ultimately wind up scoring 31 goals in 79 games because of a strong push to close out the year. He is now 39 years old as he turned a couple of weeks ago. I don't think he's going to break it this year. I do think he's going to hit 30, but I expect him to break it next year as a 40-year-old. As far as how I feel about the record-changing hands, I think if there's anyone to do it, it's Ovi. And had he not been screwed by a couple of lockouts and shortened years, he would have already broken it. I think by far, hands down, he's the greatest goal scorer that's ever played the game. I'll be giving him a round of applause whenever he breaks it. I really do think he's going to. I don't see how he could retire before breaking it, even if it takes like 4 years. Like, who cares? You gotta break it, dude. And I think the Capitals would keep bringing him back until he does. That is going to be one of the greatest feats in sports history. To think about, and this isn't taking anything away from Gretzky, but the era that he played in, uh, the pad level that the goaltenders had, just the way that the game has developed to where it's been over these last 2 decades. I don't think anyone thought that Gretzky goal scoring record was going to be broken. A major hat tip to Ovi whenever he does. I fully expect him to break it, and I quite honestly am here for it. But I'm also someone who didn't get to see Gretzky play, so I'm sure I feel differently about this than a lot of people out there. Next question comes from Miller_Emery 1999, who emailed in and asked, does anyone really think Luke Richardson is the coach of the future? What has this guy shown us? Preseason is so bad. I already have my doubts about this year, Jack. Blackhawks fans in full force already, and the regular season hasn't even begun. I love to hear it. But I understand the concern level. And look, this is what happens when, like I mentioned, when the Blackhawks are expected to do something, even if it's not like expected to take a notable leap, even if they're expected to make some sort of progression, and they don't, even through 4 preseason games, people are going to start asking questions. And it's a fair question to ask because Luke Richardson, his record has not been very good, albeit he hasn't had a team in front of him that was expected to win anything. But now that this team is expected to win some more games, if they don't, some people are going to ask whether he's the right guy. And truth is, he's yet to prove that he's the Blackhawks coach of the future. Now, whether or not he's had that opportunity to prove it, that's another question, and you can't really blame Luke Richardson for that, but the jury is still certainly out on him. I think he has, he's got the Blackhawks on his side, and I do think if the season were to end right here, right now on this type of vibe, the Blackhawks would still bring him back for his 4th year on a team option. But it's a big-time prove-it year for Luke Richardson as well as the head coach. I will say, don't get too discouraged based on what we've seen through 4 preseason games, but I understand the cause for concern right here, right now. Next question comes from Dak2515, who asked, where do you think Commesso is in his journey? They brought Brossoit in, but Commesso has shown promise. What are your thoughts? The addition of Brossoit, he's here for 2 more years. Mrazek's here for 2 more years. I think just kind of reiterates the patience that the Blackhawks are going to have with all positions in their prospect pool right now. This will become more of a question if Commesso goes and has a stunning year with the Rockford IceHogs in the AHL and looks like he's ready to be a backup for the Blackhawks next year. But until that happens, I think it's really kind of a non-issue, and I think it's smart to not rush Commesso to that next level, and the Blackhawks needed to take care of business with their NHL group, and that's what they did by bringing in Brossoit. If that kind of creates a weird dynamic and a weird tweener situation for Commesso next year, so be it. But the worst thing that can happen as a result of that is he gets more seasoned in Rockford and gets more reps than maybe we expected, and that's not worst case in the world. So 26-27 is when I ultimately expect Drew Commesso to be a full-time NHLer, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Next question comes from D. Paris2172, who asked, why did the team let Jackson Stauber go and keep Soderblom? I thought Stauber had a good finish to his season in Rockford. On the other hand, we know what Arvid is. Yeah, this was just kind of a symptom of being in a tough situation because Soderblom still had 1 year left on his contract. I still think they wanted to do the right thing and not quit on him despite him having such a disastrous year in the NHL. But with him being under contract and being like the same age as Stauber, it left the Blackhawks really in a tough spot. And ultimately, I just don't think they could afford to bring back Soderblom, Stauber, and Commesso in Rockford because it was just going to create too much of a power-ish struggle in goal. And I think they needed to clear things up for Drew Commesso a little bit more. Maybe Stauber could have competed for the NHL backup job, but for the Blackhawks to take that next step, they probably couldn't have Jackson Stauber as their backup. You don't really want him taking away starts from Commesso or Soderblom down in the AHL, right? So it just left Stauber in a weird spot. I would have liked to see him come back. I agree with that, but there just really wasn't a whole lot of room. And does he even have an NHL future? Probably not. So ultimately probably isn't going to matter. We'll see, though. Next question comes from @Colts and BBN, who asked, too early to admit this team is still terrible. Yeah, it's still too early to admit this team is terrible. Last question, PGK_Niners64. What are we going to do with Lukas Reichel, Jack? Panic button mode? No, we're not there yet, although Reichel, a dreadful performance last night. Second line was not very good, but to see Reichel basically do nothing offensively at this point in time while still getting a top 6 opportunity, not what we wanted to see from him out of training camp. And as Luke Richardson has said, he's kind of at that point now where he knows what he's got to do, and that's kind of the most disappointing part of all of it. So hopefully he finishes training camp on a higher note than he started things off. But it's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Thank you again for joining me on the show, and be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you listen to your podcasts. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. If you want to check me out, you can do so at Jack Bushman 2. Go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account as well, at Talkin' Hockey, to get all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until the next episode, everyone, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.